What if the most powerful nation in modern Europe was born not from unity, but from centuries of chaos, invasion, and survival? Long before the word Germany appeared on any map, the land at the heart of Europe was a vast frontier of dense forests, cold rivers, and scattered tribal villages. No capital, no empire, no single people calling it home. Instead, it was a world of competing tribes where survival depended on strength, loyalty, and the ability to defend your land from whoever marched over the next hill. Yet this same land would one day produce emperors who claimed the legacy of Rome, unleash armies that reshaped the fate of the entire continent, and later rebuild itself into one of the most stable and powerful democracies in the modern world. How does a region that began as a patchwork of isolated tribes become the economic engine of Europe? The answer lies in a story that stretches across 2,000 years through Roman invasions, the fall of empires, religious wars that wiped out entire populations, and the rise and collapse of one of the most feared regimes in human history. Germany's past is not a straight path toward unity. It is a long, turbulent journey shaped by conflict, ambition, reinvention, and an enduring question at the center of European history. How does a divided land eventually become a nation? Thousands of years before the rise of kings' borders or the name Germany. The center of Europe was a landscape shaped by ice forests and slow human persistence. When the last ice age began to retreat nearly 10,000 years ago, small bands of hunter-gatherers moved cautiously into the valleys between the Baltic Sea and the distant Alpine mountains. They followed migrating animals, learned the rhythms of unfamiliar rivers, and slowly transformed temporary camps into the first farming settlements of Central Europe. Over centuries, these early communities evolved into complex Bronze Age and Iron Age cultures, connected by trade routes yet divided by language and identity. By the final centuries before Christ, a clear cultural boundary had begun to emerge across the region. To the south lived the Celt societies that had already developed thriving trade networks and fortified settlements. But farther north and east, another people were rising from the forests, tribes who had migrated from Scandinavia and gradually spread across the plains of northern Europe. These Germanic peoples lived in small agricultural villages, surrounded by dense woodland, their communities bound together by clan loyalty, warrior leadership, and ancient pagan traditions honoring gods like Odin and Thor. They built no grand cities and minted no coins, yet their societies were resilient, disciplined, and fiercely independent. Unknowingly, these scattered tribes were laying the cultural foundations of a region that would one day stand at the center of Europe's destiny. By the 1st century BC, the expanding power of Rome had reached the northern edges of the known world. Beyond the calm, ordered provinces of the empire lay a vast and mysterious land the Romans called Germania, a territory of endless forests, winding rivers, and fiercely independent tribes who owed allegiance to no king and feared no distant emperor. Roman generals, including the ambitious Julius Caesar, pushed their legions across the Rhine, hoping to extend Rome's influence deeper into this unfamiliar world. Yet Germania proved unlike any land Rome had conquered before. There were no wealthy capitals to capture, no centralized authority to defeat, only scattered tribal societies whose warriors fought with a relentless understanding of the terrain around them. For Rome, the challenge was not merely military, it was environmental, cultural, and psychological. Determined to secure the frontier, Emperor Augustus later launched a larger campaign to transform Germania into a Roman province. But in the year 9 AD, that ambition collapsed in one of the most devastating defeats in Roman military history. Deep within the dark and rain-soaked Teutoburg forest, 3 Roman legions, nearly 20,000 soldiers, were lured into a deadly ambush by a coalition of Germanic tribes led by Arminius, a chieftain who had once served in the Roman army itself. Over several brutal days, the legions were destroyed, their formations broken by mud terrain and relentless attacks from unseen warriors emerging from the trees. The shock of the catastrophe echoed all the way back to Rome. From that moment forward, the empire abandoned its dream of conquering Germania and instead fortified its frontier along the Rhine and Danube rivers, establishing a tense boundary where 2 radically different worlds would coexist, trade, and quietly influence one another for centuries. For centuries after the Roman frontier stabilized along the Rhine and Danube, the world of Germania existed in a tense but steady balance with the Roman Empire. Trade flowed across the borders, Germanic warriors served in Roman auxiliary units, and Roman goods gradually appeared in tribal settlements beyond the imperial frontier. Yet beneath this fragile equilibrium, forces were gathering that would soon reshape the entire European continent. In the late 4th century, a powerful and mysterious people known as the Huns erupted out of the Eurasian steppe, sweeping westward with astonishing speed and violence. Their arrival triggered a chain reaction that historians now call the migration period, as entire Germanic tribes began moving across Europe in search of safety land and opportunity. Pressured by the advancing Huns and drawn by the weakening defenses of the Roman world, vast populations crossed into imperial territory. What followed was not a single invasion but a massive transformation of the political landscape. The Vandals and Suebi surged into Roman Spain before continuing onward into North Africa. The Franks consolidated power in Gaul. The Angles and Saxons sailed across the North Sea to settle in Britain. And in the year 410 AD, the Visigoths shocked the world by sacking the city of Rome itself, an event that symbolized the fading authority of an empire that had dominated Europe for centuries. By the end of the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire had effectively collapsed, replaced by a mosaic of new kingdoms ruled by Germanic elites who gradually blended their tribal traditions with surviving Roman institutions, creating a new political and cultural order that would shape medieval Europe. Amid the shifting political landscape that followed the collapse of Roman authority in the West, one Germanic kingdom gradually rose above the others, the realm of the Franks. Over generations, Frankish rulers consolidated their power across much of what is now France and Western Germany, blending Roman administrative traditions with Germanic leadership. But it was in the late 8th century that this kingdom reached an extraordinary height under the leadership of a ruler whose ambitions stretched far beyond tribal kingship. His name was Charlemagne. A formidable warrior and determined statesman, Charlemagne launched a series of campaigns that dramatically expanded Frankish influence across Western and Central Europe. His armies pushed eastward against the pagan Saxons in a brutal conflict that lasted nearly 30 years, forcing the region into the orbit of Frankish power and Christian rule. By the end of his conquests, Charlemagne controlled a realm that stretched hundreds of miles across the European continent, uniting diverse peoples under a single authority in a way not seen since the days of ancient Rome. Then, on Christmas Day, in the year 800 inside St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, an event occurred that would echo through European history. Pope Leo III placed a crown upon Charlemagne's head and proclaimed him Emperor of the Romans. In that moment, the imperial title of the Western Roman world was symbolically reborn. Yet the empire Charlemagne forged was held together largely by his personal authority and military strength. After his death in 814, the vast territory gradually fragmented, and in 843 his grandsons formally divided the empire. The eastern portion, known as East Francia, would become the political foundation of the German realm, a region that would later see another powerful ruler, Otto the Great, revive the imperial idea and lay the groundwork for what became known as the Holy Roman Empire. For centuries after the imperial revival under Otto the Great, the Holy Roman Empire stood at the center of European politics, yet it was unlike any traditional empire in history. Rather than a unified nation ruled from a single capital, it functioned as a vast and complicated network of territories, duchies, counties, bishoprics, and free imperial cities, each governed by its own rulers and traditions. Emperors possessed prestige and influence, but real authority was constantly negotiated with powerful regional princes who guarded their independence with determination. Over time, this decentralized structure became firmly entrenched. A decisive moment came in 1356, when Emperor Charles IV issued the Golden Bull, a decree that formally established how future emperors would be chosen. From that point forward, the imperial crown would be elected by 7 influential princes, a decision that strengthened the autonomy of regional rulers and ensured that the German lands would remain politically fragmented. Yet fragmentation did not mean stagnation. Across the empire, cities grew in wealth and ambition. Magnificent Gothic cathedrals rose above the skyline of places like Cologne and Strasbourg, their towering spires symbols of both faith and civic pride. Universities such as Heidelberg, founded in 1386, attracted scholars who helped shape the intellectual life of medieval Europe. Meanwhile, merchants formed powerful trading alliances like the Hanseatic League, linking dozens of cities along the Baltic and North Seas into a commercial network that moved timber, grain, furs, and metals across hundreds of miles. Even as Germany remained divided politically, its culture, trade, and influence quietly expanded, weaving the German-speaking world ever deeper into the fabric of Europe. By the early 16th century, the German-speaking lands of the Holy Roman Empire stood at the crossroads of profound change. Beneath the surface of political fragmentation, new ideas were spreading, ideas about faith, authority, and the rights of individuals to question long-standing institutions. In 1517, a relatively unknown German monk and theology professor named Martin Luther ignited a movement that would transform Europe forever. In the town of Wittenberg, Luther circulated his famous 95 Theses, criticizing the corruption and practices of the Catholic Church, particularly the sale of indulgences. What might once have remained a local dispute instead spread rapidly across the continent thanks to a revolutionary technology invented decades earlier in Germany itself, the printing press developed by Johannes Gutenberg in Mainz around 1440. For the first time in history, ideas could travel across hundreds of miles in a matter of weeks, reaching scholars, princes, and ordinary people alike. As Luther's message gained followers, the empire soon found itself divided. Many northern and eastern princes embraced Protestantism, some out of genuine religious conviction, and others as a way to assert independence from the powerful Catholic Habsburg emperors. Meanwhile, large parts of southern and western Germany remained loyal to the Catholic Church, turning religion into a source of deep political tension. These divisions eventually erupted into one of the most devastating conflicts Europe had ever seen. Beginning in 1618, the 30 Years' War engulfed the German lands in relentless violence as armies from across Europe marched through towns and countryside alike. Villages were burned, crops destroyed, and famine and disease followed in the wake of endless campaigns. By the time the conflict ended in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia, an estimated 4.5 to 8 million people had died and entire regions of Germany lay shattered. Yet from this devastation emerged a new political reality. The Holy Roman Empire would remain decentralized, its countless territories continuing to pursue their own paths within a fragile imperial framework. In the centuries following the devastation of the 30 Years' War, the German lands remained politically fragmented, yet two powerful states gradually began to dominate the landscape of Central Europe: Austria and Prussia. The Habsburg rulers of Austria controlled a vast and multi-ethnic empire stretching from Vienna across much of Central and Eastern Europe. While in the north, the rising power of Prussia transformed itself into one of the most disciplined military states on the continent. Throughout the 18th century, this rivalry shaped the future of the German world, especially under the leadership of Prussia's King Frederick the Great, whose reforms strengthened the army, modernized administration, and elevated Prussia to the status of a European great power. Yet, despite cultural achievements during the Enlightenment, when German thinkers, composers, and writers influenced intellectual life across Europe, the German lands still lacked political unity. That reality began to change dramatically in the 19th century. Industrialization spread across regions such as the Rhineland and Saxony railroads, connected cities, and a growing sense of shared German identity began to take hold. The decisive figure in transforming this sentiment into political reality was the Prussian statesman Otto von Bismarck. Through a calculated strategy of diplomacy and war, Bismarck unified the German states under Prussian leadership. After victories against Denmark in 1864 and Austria in 1866, the final step came with the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. France's defeat ignited a surge of nationalist enthusiasm across the German states, and on January 18, 1871, inside the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, King Wilhelm I of Prussia was proclaimed German Emperor. For the first time in history, Germany had become a unified nation-state. In the decades that followed, the German Empire rapidly industrialized, emerging as one of the world's leading economic and scientific powers. Yet this newfound strength also intensified rivalries across Europe, contributing to the tensions that erupted into the First World War in 1914. The catastrophic conflicts of the 20th century, from the rise of Nazi Germany and the devastation of World War II to the Cold War division between East and West, would test the nation in ways unimaginable to its founders. But when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 and Germany was reunified the following year, the long and turbulent journey of the German lands reached a new chapter, transforming a once divided region into a stable democracy and one of the most influential countries in the modern world. Germany's story is not simply the rise of a nation, it is the long transformation of a land that spent centuries divided, contested, and repeatedly rebuilt from the ruins of its own history. From scattered tribes in dark forests to emperors who claimed Rome's legacy from devastating wars that nearly erased entire regions to a peaceful democracy at the heart of modern Europe, Germany's journey reflects both the dangers of power and the possibility of renewal. Today, as one of the world's leading economies and a pillar of European stability, Germany stands as a reminder that even the most turbulent histories can evolve toward cooperation, resilience, and lasting change. Germany's history reminds us that nations are not shaped in a single moment. They are forged through centuries of struggle, mistakes, reinvention, and difficult choices. From tribal forests and shattered empires to the devastation of world wars and the division of the Cold War, Germany's journey shows how quickly power, fear, and ideology can push societies toward catastrophe. But it also shows something equally powerful: the ability of a nation to confront its past, rebuild its institutions, and choose a different future. For American audiences today, the lesson is clear. Strong democracies are never guaranteed. They require constant vigilance, informed citizens, and the courage to defend truth over division. History is not just about the past. It is a warning and a guide for the future. If you found this story insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep historical explorations that uncover how the past continues to shape the world we live in today.